Buongiorno, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Antonia Williams. I work at the press office here at the Center for American Studies. Today we have the pleasure for this event to we're hosting Anand Giridharadas. First of all, he's an American journalist and political commentator. He was raised in Ohio, lived in Maryland, and in Paris, France. He studied politics and history at the University of Michigan. And after graduating, he moved to Mumbai as a consultant for the firm McKinsey & Company. There he became a journalist covering India for the International Herald Tribune and the New York Times. Back in the States, he continued as a columnist for the New York Times and other newspapers as well. In 2010, he was a doctoral candidate at the Harvard University. In 2020, he hosted a talk show, Table with Anand, and started the newsletter, The Ink, devoted to politics, culture, money, and power. He has published 3 books. In 2011, India Calling, an intimate portrait of a nation's remaking, to outline the increasing opportunities provided by the Indian economy. In 2014, The True American, Murder and Mercy in Texas, centered on Mark Stroman, who murdered as an act of revenge for the 9/11 attacks of 2001, several immigrants from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the story of the survivor of a shooting, Rice Bhuyan, who campaigned to save Stroman from capital punishment. In 2018, Anand published Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, in which he argues the members of the global elite, though sometimes engaged in philanthropy, use their wealth and influence to preserve systems that concentrate wealth at the top, and at the expense of societal progress. Giridharadas lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife, Priya Parker, and their 2 children. And without further ado, I will welcome to the center. And non so, Giorgio, vuoi dire tu qualcosa di...
Yes, thank you very much, Anand, for being here today with us. And as Antonia was saying, you wrote a book that's very interesting, has a very interesting concept inside, that the rich and powerful fight for equality and justice any way they can, except ways that threaten the social order and their position atop it. Could you elaborate on this? Very interesting position.
Well, thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, Antonia. Thanks to all of you for being here. It's a beautiful day. Much more beautiful and safe outside than inside. So you're taking a great risk to be here, and I appreciate it. Very happy to be in Rome again. I want to say, first of all, that the book I wrote, Winners Take All, is really about America. I think it is a true story in other places, but I focused on America because it's better to say what you know, and if other people see a connection. But when I come to Italy and we're talking about billionaires who grab power and use the media to rule, I think you know a little bit about that as well. I began the journey of Winners Take All by making 2 observations about my country and about the world to an extent. The first observation is that we live in an amazing era of billionaire generosity. You can't walk down the street in many parts of my country without bumping into a billionaire who is trying to change the world. Someone is going to space. They're going to change the world by leaving it. Someone is going to educate girls through the power of some app they've invented. Someone is going to give back their Facebook stock to the community, even though they're sabotaging democracy at that very moment. Someone is going to, fight climate change by themselves using Tesla, so on and so forth. All of these guys giving back money philanthropically, every major corporation in America and around the world having a little sticker on the website that says CSR, corporate social responsibility. Everybody wears matching t-shirts and they go dig something once a year and they say they're helping the community. So that was observation number 1, an age of extraordinary elite generosity. The billionaires telling us that they're here to help us. They're here to give back. They care about the community. The second observation is that the same class of people in many cases, the same actual people, the same individuals, are off stage, less visibly, without microphones and cameras, doing another set of activities at the same time. And those activities are business activities that continue to push the world in a direction of greater inequality, greater concentration of wealth and power, using the money they make in business to buy political influence so that they protect the opportunity to keep making more money than they would make in a fair society, rigging the rules so that they win and others predictably, reliably lose, maintaining monopolies, engaging in wage theft, breaking unions, preventing unions. And I began to be curious about this split personality of this super elite. What was the relationship between being on stage and giving away money to everybody and empowering girls and empowering Africa and fighting diseases and this and that, and then going off stage and frankly on a 10 or 100 or 1,000-fold scale, causing the very problems that they claimed on stage to be solving? What's the relationship? And I think writers write to challenge or overturn conventional wisdom. I think the conventional wisdom that I thought was problematic was that the relationship between the extraordinary elite helping we see and the extraordinary elite hoarding we see, the conventional wisdom said the relationship was a relationship of a drop in the bucket. Yes, we do live in an age of inequalities. Yes, it is problematic, but these people are trying. Give them a chance to try. Let Bill Gates solve more diseases. Let Chinese billionaires start to give at the same percentage that American billionaires do. Let Mark Zuckerberg give not $300 million to protect the election that he was also sabotaging, but $3 billion. Maybe then, if only there were more billionaires giving and more corporations giving, then we could solve these problems. And I became curious about an opposite possibility. Maybe the extraordinary elite helping of our time is part of a system of upholding the extraordinary elite hoarding of our time. Maybe the billionaires, whether it's your Berlusconis or my Trumps or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, maybe they have figured out how to pillage the system, how to fight for a world in which only they rule, how to rig the rules, how to shut out your children from a future, or you from a future, and then have convinced you brilliantly that they are not only not the problem, they are the solution. They're going to fund some project you're part of. They're going to fund some institution. They're going to put their name on a soccer team. And they are going to convince you that the arsonists are firefighters. They're going to make you forget about the arson. They're going to make you forget that opportunity for young people in your society has essentially been killed. And they're going to not only make you forget that that happened, they're going to come back on the scene and tell you they are the saviors. It's brilliant. And I wrote a book to investigate how they do it, the moves they make, the arguments they make, because my belief was if this con, and I really do believe it's a con, if this con is not understood, it remains possible. But if the moves of the con become understood, if the next time, and we can get into some of these details maybe, but if the next time you hear the word win-win, You remember that guy in the leather jacket said, actually win-win is a more complicated proposition, not as good as it sounds. Or the next time they talk about thought leaders, and you remember, actually thought leaders are what these billionaires, these are the thinkers they cultivate, thinkers who do not challenge power, they call thought leaders, and they elevate them. If you are able to see through the next time you hear someone is giving away $10 billion, and if your mind next time asks, what did you pay in taxes? Have you paid your taxes? What's your tax situation? If you think that next time you hear about that donation, I'll be very happy. If you start to see through this charade, as I call it in the book, through which they are stealing your future and convincing you that they are your salvation. If you begin to see through that, I believe it becomes possible to actually build very differently, to clear the brush of, frankly, bullshit that these people have invented to persuade you that you better not change things too much. And I wrote the book to clear that brush. And I believe if we do, it becomes possible to look at other ways of making change that do not require permission slips from the most powerful people in the world.
Thank you very much. The silence that accompanied your talk is significant. And I would like to add.
Maybe they were all billionaires.
Yeah, maybe they were sleeping. I don't know. Well, actually, I would like to close this part of our program with a sentence that is a very strong sentence that I read on your book. Rather than rely on scraps from the winners, we must take on the grueling democratic work of building more robust, egalitarian institutions and truly changing the world. So I suggest you to take, this book has not been translated in Italian, so you only can read it in English, fortunately. And you can find it through the different system of library here, English library in Rome, or maybe on the net. But now the surprise of this event is that we have changed and we are challenging what we call Anand's dictionary, Anand's alphabet. So me and Antonia will read a word at a time, and we give 1 minute to Anand to answer shortly, sharply, and frankly. The first word.
I just want to say this may be a terrible idea. I have never done this before.
But you have accepted now, eh? Okay.
I have technically accepted, yes. So let's do the alphabet.
But I have to say that if you are not completely sure of the answer, or if you want to have an help, we have Mrs. Priya Parker, that is your wife, sitting on the back. She's trying to hide herself, but we know that she's there. She's a writer. She's a person that I've seen on the web discussing with you several times. So anytime you need an help, we'll take a chair and ask Priya to join you to support your answer. So the first question is the most difficult. In 1 minute, what is America?
I think America, I'll say it in this moment. I think America is in what I call a cold civil war. It's not the Civil War of 150 years ago. I just saw some books about it in the other room, of real violence, of huge fraction of the population dead. It is a cold civil war. And it is a civil war about the question of what America is. And there's a fundamental choice and two different visions available. I don't think it'll surprise you which one I'm more attracted by. I think the vision, I think the trajectory of America right now, and this sometimes, I have a lot of criticisms of my country, but the most admiring thing I can say about it, and my existence as an American is testimony to it, that America is attempting right now to become a kind of country that has not really existed in history, which is a superpower of color, a great power without a majority race that has chosen through democratic processes to open itself up to all the world, to people of every background. I live in New York. I'm already living in that America. When I get in the subway, it looks like the world. California, people already living in that society. A few of our states, already majority, minority. Several cities, several of our top 20 cities, majority, minority. Actually, this is something where Europe, Canada has many places where they shine compared to us in the United States. But if you look on this measure, we are actually ahead of virtually any place on earth. And it's an extraordinary thing because it is a choice a 80, 90% white country made over a period of time to open itself up to the world, to become a country based on shared values, not shared identity. That's the vision. That's the trajectory. And the awfulness of America right now is a revolt against the future, is a significant minority of people who who would rather break their country than share it. And they have chosen to engage in this cold civil war. Many of them threaten a hot civil war. And I think we're witnessing a battle for the soul of the country, and I think the future will prevail. I think their revolt against the future will fail.
Antonia.
The next, well, it's more than one word, but Black Lives Matter, what comes to mind?
I think this is the most important social movement of my lifetime. I was born in 1981. And I would just say two quick things about it. I think it is important on the level that it actually began, which is a movement against police violence. That's in a way the narrow cause, right? It's been quite successful in forcing the issue, forcing conversation, forcing some degree of reform, not enough by any means. But I actually think the way in which Black Lives Matter is even more successful is in the broader. I think it has forced the subtext of American life, which is race, to become the text. In a way that we never have in American history. We are actually talking every day in every institution, in corporations, in academia. This is now the conversation, right? When I was growing up, no one talked about whiteness. No one talked about white supremacy. I had things happen to me. I was bullied in school. I now realize very much because of being a brown child in a almost all white environment. But in that moment, I didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the frameworks to understand what was happening to me. Today, if that happens to my son, there is a whole apparatus of concepts, of ideas, of programs in school to see that. So I think Black Lives Matter has forced a reckoning with white supremacy as a central theme of American life and forced white people into a great degree of reflection and self-awareness of a kind that is a remarkable, remarkable achievement.
Let's change continent. The next word is China.
China is the great beneficiary of the American unraveling. And I think a lot of Americans who are choosing to not get vaccinated, not wear masks, undermine free elections. I don't know if the Chinese are paying them or what, but they certainly seem to be doing the work of trying to bury the United States of America and make China the most powerful country in the world, and they're succeeding.
Digital.
I think we're in an interesting moment now. I'm going to give you three words. I think phase one of the digital revolution was the boom, right? And there was just this 20-year boom full of all this utopian promise. Once we have these technologies, this problem will be solved, that problem will be solved. If you just give us power as these platforms, everything will be great. I think then right before, in the years before the pandemic, I think a different story, not boom, but doom took over. I think people started to realize this is a very dangerous set of actors. These are dangerous technologies if left the way they are. We're going to end up with one store, one place to talk to each other, and the enormous control, misinformation. And as that backlash, the techlash, as it was called, was brewing, the pandemic happened. So we went from boom to doom to Zoom. And suddenly, even though this criticism was happening, we were all suddenly dependent. You couldn't do this. We needed these technologies. And so I think it has forced a nuanced conversation right now. We are ready for it coming out of the pandemic, if we ever come out of the pandemic, of what is the proper place for these technologies, these platforms in our life. But how do we make them serve us and not serve them?
Do you want to continue, or you prefer to have a glass of water?
I'm good.
I'll go on then. Experience.
I think in going back to some of the conversation about race, I think one of the most important new ideas in American discourse, certainly, and maybe it's happening here, is the idea of lived experience. And I think it goes to this question of who do we listen to in policy debates? And I think there's a growing focus, whether it's fighting climate, whether it's how money is given philanthropically, whether it's in writing, my world of writing, of paying more attention to centering people with the lived experience of the problems we are talking about.
Fantasy. Can you hear me? Fantasy is the next word.
What comes to me here is thinking about, in my country, the political right. The difference between the parties or the left and the right in the United States used to be philosophical. More government, less government, low taxes, high taxes, imperialistic foreign policy, non-interventionist foreign policy. That is no longer the division. The main way to understand the division in American life right now is between people who live in reality and people who live in fantasy. And I don't say that as a slander. It is literally the case that a very significant fraction of people on the right watch media like Fox News, Breitbart, live in a complete ecosystem in which they actually don't know anything that's true anymore.
The next letter is G, like grief.
I think there has been a huge amount of unprocessed grief from COVID that is going to be with us for a long time. That in the rush to get back inside, get back to school, get back to normal, get back to meetings, get back to the jobs we hated, that there's been such an effort to run forward, to be done with this thing, that having lost 700,000 people in the United States, I don't think it's been addressed. I don't think it's been processed. A lot of those people in the early days couldn't even have funerals. And I would also say more broadly in terms of unprocessed grief, I think one way to understand the broader political situation of the country is there's a lot of unprocessed grief for white and male privilege and power. A lot of Americans, I think, are mourning the death of a certain kind of impunity and specialness and centerness and defaultness, and don't find they have a way to process that grief. And so their grief becomes a fascist political movement.
The next word is human.
I think one of the most exciting intellectual currents in the world today is a new way of looking at the world that decenters the human being, whether it's thinking about the planet, thinking about sustainability. It's forcing us, asking us to think about a world in which human beings are not as important as we thought we were, maybe more important in causing problems and less important to the solution.
Well, my word is identity.
I think one of the challenges that I write about and think about a lot is that we're living in a golden age in some ways of actually reckoning with identity, people being aware of identity. What I was saying earlier about my own experience. We talk about these things now. White people think about being white. Black people are able to talk about their experience of being black. These things are not hidden. There's real discussion. And you go, and the same thing is happening in gender. The same thing is happening in national origin. And I think I welcome this. I think it's terrific to be having these conversations. I also think it is a challenge to how do you recognize everybody in their unique particularity and still have broad bonds of solidarity, still have cross-cutting identities so that we're not all just an island.
J for justice.
Justice. There's so many places to go. I think going back to the Winners Take All book, I think the part of the vision of justice that I tried to articulate is real justice involving the loss of power. And part of what the richest and most powerful people have tried to market is the idea of justice that costs no one anything. Justice for free. And I don't think there is free justice. I think justice involves the loss of power for some.
Next word is taking us to the last month. Kabul.
I think, and I have been a critic of President Biden in many ways. I think President Biden did the absolute right thing in shutting down the American imperial occupation of Afghanistan. It was a dangerous thing to do. It was unpopular in many quarters, although broadly supported by a majority. Unpopular among the American power establishment. And I think it raises the broader question of why the United States was trying to spread to other places what it doesn't even have itself. I don't understand how you can spread something that you don't possess. If you are not a flourishing democracy yourself, how do you spread democracy? So for the last 20 years, the United States was, running the knife over the toast and there was no butter. It was just scraping the toast. Nothing to spread, nothing to share. The world would have been much better off if we had been nation building in the United States. Thousands of our bridges could fall between now and the end of this talk. If we had been spreading democracy in places like Georgia, the state where democracy is under attack. I'm very worried for Afghanistan, for the women of Afghanistan in particular. But I also think that a lot of women were harmed in Afghanistan by American imperialism and by bombs and drones. And we have to find a new way of fighting for human rights in that country that does not involve taking them away by tanks.
Before Antonia tells you the next word, I warn you that your wife is on the back of the room. Go on.
The next word is love.
I'm going to quote a writer, a friend of mine, Krista Tippett, who has a wonderful radio show called On Being about spirituality. It's a way of looking at all kinds of issues through a spiritual lens. And she has this great line in her book that love is a concept, very powerful concept, revolutionary concept that we have tamed and domesticated and taken this very small version of, which is like a kind of private family emotion. Something that happens between parents and children or friends. You say, I love you, I love you. And she says that the shame in that is that the real power of the idea of love is as a political idea, as a moral idea, and frankly, as an idea towards strangers. So I think the most interesting and neglected understanding of the word love is love for strangers expressed through loving systems.
Well, memory.
On Saturday night, I was with my wife at this new place called the Sanctuary. It's a club. And I had a few Negronis, and then I have no memory of the night after that.
The next word is Nazism.
I mean, you just showed me down on the street, Giorgio, these golden squares on the street marking persecution of Jews in this community decades ago. And so, you know, I don't think any of us uses the word Nazism lightly, but there can be no doubt that in my country at this moment, there is a significant minority of people who essentially identify with a modern American democratic Nazism, who again are motivated by a desire to break the country rather than share it. And they have been called many euphemistic things, the alt-right, the neo-Nazis. It's interesting, no one ever says neo-communists. Communists are always communists, but they're always trying to make excuses for the fascists. Neo-Nazi is just a new Nazi, which is just a Nazi. And I think it is the great political challenge for everybody else who does not feel that way to defeat this. And I do not think we are doing a great job. I don't think we know how to do it. I look at right now, this is a little parochial, but I look at these big debates in Washington about creating an infrastructure bill and creating a new strengthened social safety net. And they're sitting there worrying about, should we only give child payments to parents, $1,000 a month per child? Should we only give them to you if you make less than $60,000, or should we give them to everybody? This is the debate. And you got Nazis in the other room trying to plan the takeover of the country. And the other side is like, maybe people above 60,000 don't need the $1,000. Should we do that? And it's just like, do you recognize the moment you live in? Do you recognize the moment you live in? And giving people money, doing these kind of programs that actually show government can work is particularly important when you have that other thing in the other room, to show people. And if you instead sit there and argue about stupid stuff and do not deliver for people, those people are going to start looking better and better for a growing number of Americans.
The answer to the next word will be very interesting for our public. Opportunity.
I mean, I'm sad to say that I come to Europe to see what the American dream looks like in practice. The American dream is not something that exists in America anymore. If the idea is that you, through the effort you make, through the intelligence and talent you have, you are free to find your level, to rise through a ladder of opportunity. It's an incredible American concept that does not exist in the United States. The United States ranks at the bottom. The OECD maintains a list of social mobility index, which basically means how closely does your parents' income predict your income? And you don't want your parents' income to heavily predict your income unless your parents have a lot of income. You want it to be almost random, right? You want very rich people without talent to kind of sink to the bottom, and you want very brilliant people born with nothing to rise to the top. And in America, that essentially does not happen. That happens with kind of lottery frequency. And yet we tell the world we are the place where anybody can come and have opportunity. And part of the debate that we are having now, improbably enough under Joe Biden, who was not a likely person for this, but has become an unlikely avatar of this conversation, we are having a real conversation about European style social democracy in the United States. We are talking about free college in a way that has never been the conversation in this country. Joe Biden is pushing for free community college, a historical moderate guy, right? Which would start to bring America into line of places like Italy. We're talking about a child benefit, cash payments for people with children, which already now exist, but are temporary for now. We are talking about universal childcare, daycare, right? This was not a conversation at all 3 or 4 years ago. So we are having finally in this country, in the United States, a conversation about the kind of systems that you all have in Europe.
The next word is peace.
I'm in favor of it.
Well, the next one is qualunquism.
Yeah, I had to look this one up. I didn't know the word, but it's kind of like whateverism, political apathy. I love that word, first of all. I'm going to bring it back to America.
It's an English word, isn't it?
I don't think so. Is
I
it?
found it on the vocabulary.
Oh, well, I don't know all the English words, apparently. I think there has been a lot of old shaming of young people for apathy. You guys don't participate in the political process. You guys don't vote. You're lazy. You don't care. What kind of future do you expect if you don't participate? And I share the view that it's important to participate. But I think around the world, young people are actually telling us something by not participating. Not participating is a form of participation. And they are telling us that we have built democracies that mock them, that make a mockery of themselves, that do not make young people feel that there's any kind of connection between the choice you make and the kind of life you have. And young people are correct in that intuition. And so, yes, we need to lecture young people to participate more, but frankly, what's way more important is we need to build democratic structures that persuade young people that when you participate, things change. Because young people did come out and vote for Joe Biden, for example, against a lot of odds and with a lot of doubts. They did it. They got rid of Trump. And now they're sitting there arguing about maybe we don't have to help as many people as possible. What are you going to tell those young people?
The next word is race.
We've talked about this a little already, but I would say the big and exciting shift in American life, and as you can tell, I'm trying to give you some mix of doom and hope. I think we've crossed a line in American life where a very familiar old mantra, I don't see color, that white Americans used to say, is no longer a thing a reasonable person can say. We have actually crossed into a place of awareness, thanks to Black Lives Matter, thanks to writers like Ta-Nehisi Coates, the 1619 Project, the New York Times, where I think most thoughtful Americans, educated Americans certainly, would agree that race is a very powerful structuring agent in American life. It colors everything. It affects everything. There's no institution that is untouched by it, and that ignoring it doesn't mean you're not racist. In fact, ignoring it means you are possibly perpetuating invisible systemic racism. And I think the effort by a bunch of important writers to redefine racism from individual acts of meanness to systems that are passively perpetuated by no one doing anything about them has been one of the great intellectual achievements of this period.
Glass of water?
No, maybe a little bit.
I just want to give you a break. We are at sacrifice.
I think there is for the last 40 years in the United States, and this has been true of the neoliberal era around the world, there has been a story told that is anti-sacrifice, that says basically, just buy things, pursue your business dreams, make as much money as you can, buy as big a house as you can, and the world will take care of itself. The planet will take care of itself. Democracy will take care of itself. Just worry about you. And that story has been told to such an extreme that when COVID hit, and we just asked people to wear masks at the beginning, a very significant fraction of Americans felt that this was tyranny. The mask was tyranny. They felt like they were being persecuted for masks. And now that they're being asked to get vaccines, a very significant minority of Americans feels persecuted because they have been told a story that you never have to do anything for the commons. Just buy things, drive nice cars, work, feed your family, the world will take care of itself. And so solidarity is a value system that requires exercise. And if you spend decades telling people there's no such thing as solidarity, when something like a pandemic happens and your life literally depends on whether everybody else is willing to care about anyone besides themselves, you end up as a very weak society. And I also think on that there's a particular issue with men in America who feel so insecure about their masculinity, so threatened by a world in which women are equal, that small, stupid acts of male defiance give them little dopamine hits of strength. And I think about the most powerful example in COVID for me was the soldier who shot bin Laden in 2001, who's now, like everybody, an influencer. He was on a Delta flight early in the pandemic. He refused to wear a mask. He took a selfie like this in the plane with another man, also a former soldier, older than him, in a Marine's hat. And that guy was properly wearing a mask. I think this guy's name is Robert O'Neill. He takes a selfie of himself not wearing a mask, showing the other guy properly wearing a mask. And he writes in the caption, "Masks are for pussies." This is someone with a big following. And I thought it was one of the most revealing moments of the whole pandemic in America, because it tells you that for a large number of American men, even killing Osama bin Laden yourself with a gun, the ultimate triumph of the toxic model of American manhood. You personally shot bin Laden, and your whole, your masculine whole is still so gaping. You are still so insecure. Every gay person needs to be insulted for you to still feel like a man. Every woman needs to be put down for you to still feel like a man. Every mandate to wear a mask to get a vaccine needs to be defied for you to still feel like a man. Your hole is so deep. Shooting bin Laden still doesn't make you feel enough like a man that you need to associate masks with female genitalia and insult a fellow soldier who's doing the right thing. I think until we solve this crisis that American men are having about being men, a lot of these other problems we've talked about today remain unsolvable.
The next word, T for Trump.
I mean, there's so much to say about Trump and nothing to say about Trump. I would say two things quickly. Trump is a symptom, not the disease. And a lot of Americans want you to think he's the whole disease. He's the symptom. The disease is even bigger than him. And it's important to start understanding what that is. It's one failed institution, crumbling institution after another. Someone like that only becomes possible in a society where virtually every mainstream institution is failing. And the second thing I'll say is he's still a threat. There is no strong person on the right who I could foresee, he may very well come back.
Well, it comes to the next word, unexpected.
I love this theme. And what I wanted to say, and Trump is a good example of what I'm about to say. So is climate. So is COVID. Actually, things that are unexpected are often expected by some people, right? If you think about climate change, an unexpected phenomenon, but a small group of people have been expecting it and telling us to expect it for a long time. We didn't listen. Trump, unexpected phenomenon. Brexit, unexpected phenomenon. But a small group of writers, commentators, people ringing alarm bells were telling us actually. There were people writing about the onset of authoritarian tendencies in American life, the Republican Party dissolving its connection to reality. We didn't listen to those people. Those people didn't go on TV. The people who didn't depress people went on TV. COVID, unexpected. But there were some people who did expect it, who warned us, who wrote papers. And what I see happening is every time an unexpected thing happens, the obvious thing to do is to stop listening to the people who didn't expect it and start listening to the people who did expect it. But instead, in our writers and thinkers and TV, we continue to elevate the people for whom everything is unexpected. Maybe because they're more interesting on television, because they're always so energized by their own surprise. But people who are perpetually surprised by these things are perhaps not the best guides to the future. And I think we need to do a better job of thinking about who was telling us these truths all along.
What can you tell us about violence?
It's the American way. I think there's a real reflection happening in America about why America is so violent. I think there's an understanding about violence, a growing understanding of violence as being intrinsically connected to the racial story of the country. As that story has grown more prominent as we're talking about, I think there's been an understanding of how violence paired with that. And I think I would say right now, talking about the cold Civil War, it's still cold. I think the most dangerous possibility in American life is that you start to see the cold Civil War heat up through violence. You start to see these kind of paramilitary forces, which is a strange word to use in the context of an advanced country, but really does exist in a certain way. Texas just created an abortion law that allows any person in the entire country to sue a woman who gets an abortion. I mean, that's essentially a kind of deputizing anybody to become the police of women's uteruses around the country. There is a illiberal tendency that is growing. There are militias, there are, we see it when we drive around New York State. There are this new flag that is the American flag, except it's all black with a blue line that is the support police flag, which is a really weird thing to put on your house, actually. I mean, you can support any number. I support ice cream. I don't have an ice cream flag. People are choosing one flag to put outside their house. And the one message they want to say is, we stand with the police. Well, that is a flag of fascism, actually. And it is a flag, I think, that speaks to this possibility of violence that is lurking just below the surface of this Trumpist fascist movement.
We only have 4 more. Writing.
Writing is a great life. We're going to have a chance to talk informally to all of you after. I know there were some of you in the other rooms as well, so I'm happy to chat with you all also. If you're interested in writing, I really encourage you. It's not necessarily an easy career path. I think in a moment like this, when the world is so baffling, and so many of the old voices led us astray, we need writers, chroniclers, fiction writers, journalists to tell new stories and tell new truths. And so if any of you are thinking about that, I encourage you.
Xenophobia.
It's such a defining political current everywhere. And going back to the beginning of the conversation, I think we have to pair it with an understanding of the good thing that we are attempting in many of these societies. You know, my family comes from India, and India is not a nation of immigrants. It is not trying to become a nation of immigrants. There are not many rooms that look like this in India with people from multiple continents sitting in a space. I don't say that as an insult to India. India is more or less a country for Indian people, and that's its self-image, that's its history, that's fine. It's important before we talk about the problem to say a lot of countries in the West, to their great credit, are actually trying to build countries that are plural, that look like this room. And that not everyone's doing that. I don't think China is trying to do that, right? It's a different model. It's an admirable model. It's a model worth defending. And it's a model we are hugely messing up. But I think we are messing it up because we are trying something brave. We are actually falling on our face because we are jumping high. And the xenophobia is a reaction among people who are afraid of this future. And I think we need to fight them. We need to resist their resistance. But I also think we need to persuade them of this future and not simply have it feel like an imposition. We need to make the case, make the argument, bring them along. Because actually what we are fighting for in these multicultural societies we live in is I think a glorious ambition.
Why like youth?
A lot of youth in this room, or you just use very good skincare products. What a world we leave you, right? I mean, look at my hair color. I'm clearly older than you. You know, a world of debts, a world of climate crisis, physical sickness everywhere right now. It's not good. And there is a lot of youth depression right now around climate in particular, and understandably. I mean, what good is it having parents who say they love you, but the entire class of the generational class of your parents has ruined your domestic opportunity structure and the habitability of your planet? What does it mean to have a parent's love? That said, this is the kind of moment in history that creates the opportunity to rewrite the rules of the world. Most times that's actually not really available to people, right? You think about what happened to the status of women in Europe and the United States after World War II, right? It's when you have these, or World War I, when you have these awful disruptions in everything, that it actually becomes possible to rewrite the rules of the economy, to have an economics of solidarity, to change the legal status of women, et cetera, et cetera. Those good things have only happened throughout history in moments of convulsion. So this is one of those moments of convulsion, of the neoliberal era spending itself, of crises of inequality, of COVID, of the planet. And so I think there is a real opportunity that young people have right now to write new rules of how the world works that actually was not an opportunity 10 years ago. I don't think there was that space. I think there is that space now. I don't think that's a guaranteed outcome, but I think that is going to fall on this generation that has so much reason to be angry, and hopefully can challenge that channel that righteous anger into a reinvention of the whole thing.
And the last word, I know you mentioned it briefly earlier, and we're all more than familiar with it, but it's Zoom.
I prefer phone calls.
Okay. I think we all do.
I think this was a format that we proposed yesterday, and Anand accepted it without parachute. So congratulations. And I think that if you enjoyed it, maybe your next talk, television talk, will be Anand's alphabet.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
I'm scared to go to China where there's many more letters in the alphabet.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, in Italian, you only have 21. We had to do 25 for
Which ones are you missing?
We are missing X, we are missing Y, we are missing W, and K.
Is this true?
Yes.
Those letters do not exist in
Do
this?
not exist in the Italian alphabet.
What happened to them?
We just sold them. We sold them.
Ah,
Our debt.
and you bought
Our-
Juventus in exchange
Yes,
for
our
yeah.
national debt
Wow.
forced us to sell them.
That is
Now we go
mind-blowing.
to the question time because he had already so many questions from us. You can start. We take only 3, 4, and then Anand will be able to answer to you personally in the other room. We have to fit within our. Yes, the microphone.
And you can also ask questions in the other rooms?
You can
Or do
ask
they have to
other
come here,
questions.
or-
No, you go to the other room. They can ask you questions.
Right.
Only that our format will finish on the streaming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very informative speech. I have 2 questions, and they're both taken from Winner Takes All. First question. I believe that the inequality problem has more to do with mediocre leaders, the ones that you prefer as thought leaders from your book, than the billionaires. So my question is, how do we fundamentally create change in the status quo if we have a kind of circular system in which only thought leaders are able to attain those positions from which real fundamental change is possible? In other words, because of how public intellectuals, I would include you in those, do not cozy up and threaten the status quo, that makes them unable, most of the times, to attain positions of which they can truly fundamentally change the status quo, and only thought leaders attain those. And now we have a kind of circular thing. So how do we break off from that?
I'll do each one quickly, but we'll only do one question per person if that's okay. But I appreciate that question. I think the question is how, given the rigged system in which real thinkers who challenge power are kind of co-opted to become court jesters of the powerful and of the kind of billionaire circuit, how do we support, how do we hear challenging ideas? And I think it's incredibly important, and maybe festivals like this are part of it, to create alternative spaces that are not controlled by those people, and that we see it in the media, right? Billionaires own more and more of the media. So that becomes another space where you're not going to hear these things. But there are remarkable tools right now that make other forms of media possible. I created a newsletter on this platform called Substack. There's other people doing YouTube channels and YouTube shows. There's all kinds of things now. And I think those things become incredibly important. I also think, last point on that, is that the reason we don't have more critical thinking in media is not always the corruption. It's often just like the laziness. I've been in those TV stations. I work for a TV station. I say very provocative things on that TV station all the time. No one has ever stopped me. And people I work with often say like, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And they start reading and thinking. Often the background of people going into television journalism, they just are not people who have thought very deeply about some of these issues. They came up covering local news. And so I think we also need to change the profile of who wants to work in television, right? Who actually wants to be in those spaces. It's not always forbidden. There are opportunities, but a lot of serious writers I know look down on television. And they sneer at television, and they have no interest in television. And I realized when I started doing television, I realized how few people were reading my writing, right? I realized I was not reaching anybody when I was just doing writing. It's a very depressing thought because I'm a writer. But I realized if I want to talk about what's happening in this country, I can write. That's what I do 95% of the time. But if I can go on TV for 5 minutes and talk to 4 million people and bring some different perspective, I need to go in that space. And there's a lot of serious thinkers who do not want to go in that space. And I think they need to go in that space.
Yes.
I like these little hats on the microphones. They're very cute.
Then you have to sterilize them every time you have to remove it.
I might get one of these hats.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and thank you for your speech. I'm Julia. I'm Italian. And rather than a question, it's more like I give you like the letter as they did, and you give your personal opinion. So P as politically correct, and something that it's very used and most people don't really know what it is about. And I was going to ask
I mean,
you.
political correctness, PC, like, what's very interesting is people, particularly on the right now in America, criticize political correctness. And they feel like they're walking on eggshells all the time. They can't say what they think anymore. But if not hurting other people, not insulting other people, not demeaning other people, makes you feel like your style is cramped, maybe there's a problem with your style. If I don't think it is political correctness, or maybe it is, to listen to women in meetings. But for most of the preceding decades, if not always, most women were not listened to in meetings the way they ought to be listened to. And now men criticize the new culture as political correctness. So if that's political correctness, sign me up.
Next one.
Good afternoon. My name is Ekbal and I'm from Italy. My question is, from the many problems you've mentioned about American society, I believe that they are deeply rooted in the economic system, capitalism. So my question would be, do you see any possibility of change, an ethical possibility? And do you think there is actually a valid alternative to this type of capitalism we are seeing?
I mean, I think my problem with the word capitalism in these debates is that it means everything and nothing, right? We have so many forms of capitalism being practiced in different countries and such different human outcomes, right? They have capitalism in Norway, right? I don't know if you'd call it a capitalist country or not, but there's a lot of capitalism going on in Norway. There's a lot of money being made. There's a lot of people with nice houses. There's a lot of businesses. There's capital markets. But in that country, you don't die because you don't have an insurance company. In my country, you do die if you don't have an insurance company and you get some silly thing. So I think the question becomes, what kind of capitalism do you have? And the metaphor that I prefer is that I think of these different elements of the society as like organs in the body, right? You have a business sector, call it a capitalist sector. You have a public sector, common institutions that we pay for together, that act in our name. That's another organ. You have an educational sector that's kind of different from both of those. You have a nonprofit civil society sector. You have writers who kind of are a small organ somewhere looking at all these other organs and holding them accountable. And I think in a healthy society, you have all of these organs and they're, as in your body, they're working together in some symbiosis, right? Now, if you think about what happens when a body gets cancer, one of those organs starts to operate on the assumption that it needs to eat all those other organs. This, to me, is capitalism in America in this moment, right? The stomach's not content to be the stomach. The stomach wants to be the whole body. It wants to own the government. It wants to own the academic sector. It wants to control writing through patronage of thought leaders. And so it's a totalism of capitalism. That, I think, is the problem. And what a lot of people on the right do is try to convince people that what I am saying means we will have to eliminate capitalism. There will be no private property. There will be, and they do that because they want to scare people. And it's false. Our own society was different 40 years ago before they did all this stuff to the tax code and regulation. Different societies are different. You in Italy do universities differently. You get a different outcome than we do. You know, maybe your COVID regulation is not as good at COVID payments for people who are unemployed. We're not as good as France. I mean, there's variation. And instead of treating this as something where everybody's trying different models and people are getting different human outcomes and we should look at what works and what doesn't, we treat this as either we leave people alone in the market or we live in the Soviet Union. And I think we really have to shatter this binary. We have come strangely to a place where our understanding of gender is more fluid than our understanding of economic and political systems. And it'd be very useful if we understood that fluidity as well.
Well, before we close, I would like to ask Mrs. Priam Parker, if you agree with all the answers and all the definition of your husband, speak up now or be silent forever. And do not expect after to quarrel. Just tell us if you agree on all his definition. Please.
Thank you very much for having us. I agree with much. And as Anna knows, there's a public sphere and a private sphere. And I will keep my private sphere thoughts out. No, I'm just kidding. But I want to also compliment you on the model of your gathering. I think it was very innovative to go from the alphabet from A to Z. And your selection of word choice. And it's just an incredible way to innovate and create an unexpected format that we will take with us. You go to many panels and it's the same format again and again, and you've done something very unique here. So thank you for having us.
Thank you to you. Thank you to all. Thank you, Anand. I think your talk will be very inspirational for all of us. So please now, as you promised, the other people, the other students in the other room waits for you. Enjoy your time in Rome. Have a nice flight back. And please look at our festival for the next edition in order to come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much, truly. Thank you.